Thank you for everyone for joining tonight. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm with the BPMA. I'm one of the co-directors of programming. And tonight we are going to be speaking about optimizing your product analytics stack. We have a great panelist assembled for tonight. But before we jump into that, I want to step back for a moment and explain a little bit about who BPMA is for those of you that are new to us. BPMA is a volunteer-led organization focused on advancing the careers of product management and product marketing professionals in the Boston area and beyond. We do that in a couple of key ways. One is through events like the one tonight. I'll give you a little bit more details about our event types and upcoming ones in a minute. Through content, our blog team is furiously posting several times a month to our blog, as you can see here, as well as mentorship and our job board. So we have a very vibrant mentorship program. So whether you want to be a mentor or a mentee and you want to get involved and help people out or receive some coaching, you can go to our website and get involved there. And then our job board, if you're looking to make this move to make that next job connection you need. Our job board is curated, it's select jobs, and typically there's a direct connection to either the hiring manager or someone very closely related to the role that you can get from going to that job board. In terms of upcoming events, we typically do one sort of large format event like this per month. You can see some of the future ones there at the bottom of this list. We're also trialing out some new format events to give people more ways to connect. So the first one is the BPMA Connect event coming this Monday. We're also trying out different times of day. So these first two will be over the lunchtime hour. The first one is completely unstructured networking, but just we'll rotate the topics. And you can see the first one is the women in product networking. The second one coming up this Thursday, next week, is also at lunchtime, and that will be the Leaders Forum. This is a smaller group, more like a facilitated discussion on a topic. This particular one is really aimed at people that are probably in that mid to senior level. They have some team and portfolio management responsibilities in product, and we're really trying to hone in on that use case. So as you can see, there's a breadth of event types available to everyone. You can learn more at our website listed below. I also mentioned our job board. This is just the most recent postings. There's many more on the site you can go check out. But I just want to give you a sense that there is a broad breadth and depth of roles. So both in terms of level of what's being offered and also different types of roles. So it's not just product, some UX and product marketing roles as well, including one, I believe, with one of our speakers companies tonight. So cheap plug there. Go check it out later. I also want to pause for a moment and thank our sponsors. Without our sponsors, the content and programming that BPA brings to everyone would not be possible. All of these sponsors serve the Boston product community in some way or the other, or the broader product community. So I encourage everyone to go have a look, get to know these organizations and see how they might be able to help you out. I'm also going to pause for one internal announcement from our president, Steve.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everybody. I want to remind everybody that coming up on June 11th and 12th is Product Camp Online, a great new event sponsored in part by Product Camp Boston, which is affiliated with Boston Products Management Association. Everybody is welcome to attend and to speak at this amazing online event that runs for 2 days. And so if you're interested, please please go to productcamponline.org or productcampboston.org. And if you've got questions, let us know. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so let's get on to our agenda for this evening. So tonight we're going to start out with some introductions from our panelists. So you get a chance to see who's here and where they come from and their background. We're then going to launch into sort of a panel discussion format for the majority of the presentation style. We're going to go through a range of topics from when and where to use analytics, and then really kind of get into the nitty gritty of like which ones are really good for which use cases and pitfalls and that type of stuff. We'll then pause and go out to small groups where we can do some networking with your peers that are on the call, as well as some discussion about tonight's content. And then we're all going to come back after about 10 minutes to do a large group Q&A with the panelists until we run out of questions. We'll see how far we get. So with that, I'm going to let the panelists come off of mute and introduce themselves, starting with Greg. Thanks.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Chris. My name is Greg Ackenbach. I am the VP of product at PredictAP. PredictAP is kind of like a newer fintech startup that got incorporated last year. We're kind of focused on invoice processing for large real estate investment companies. We're just slowly coming out of stealth mode right now. Prior to that, I spent like the last almost 7 years in the MarTech space, running product for SnapApp and Uberflip. Josh?
Awesome. So Josh Rosick-Marks. Right now, I am running product at a fintech for good startup down in New York City called Bridget, that helps everyday Americans save money and make a change in their financial lives. It's pretty exciting. Before this, I worked at a number of MarTech, sales tech, and even some B2C companies here in Boston, including most recently Alice, which is a pretty exciting corporate gifting and personal experience platform.
All right, I'm up. Good evening, everyone. Doug Giuliana. I am the Director of Product at Alignable. We are a networking website for small business owners, and actually been booming during the pandemic, trying to help small business owners survive and thrive in these tough times. Have about 12 years in product, and took a little detour for about a decade, and started and ran a series of my own small businesses in the boating industry.
Nice.
All right, cool. So I'm going to turn the share off so we don't have to look at surprise faces while we're talking, and we'll just jump into the panel here. All right, so I'll start off with a first question to Greg, just to make sure that we're kind of starting off on a good foundation here. And that's, how do you think about coaching someone who's like new to PM, or maybe they've come from a place that doesn't have a really strong and vibrant analytics or sort of data rich background? Like, when are the times where you really want to like teach them, like, this is where you should be looking to use analytics, this is where you should be looking to maybe not, it's like the hammers for the wrong tool. How do you think about those conversations?
Yeah, I think that, when I've done this myself, or kind of when I've worked with people who are kind of new to the concept, I always like to start with the why are you doing this and what are you trying to measure conversation. So I think, one of the things that'll probably come up throughout the course of today's session is there's infinite things that you can do today with great ease as far as like tracking what people are doing in your product. But you really need to be able to start by thinking about like, why are you doing this? Because you'll drive yourself crazy just trying to track everything that everybody is trying to do. So I kind of like to start with, like more broad buckets, like, all right, so you want to use an analytics tool, or you want to start tracking user behaviors. Why do you want to do that? Are you trying to just get an overall grasp of what people are doing in the product? Are you trying to draw some trends with product adoption? Are you trying to track new feature adoption? Are you trying to figure out like what your aha moment is, which is a whole other topic we can maybe dig into today, or there's thought leadership on that into itself. So really starting with like what are you trying to learn and why are you trying to do it? The best thing I kind of like to try to start with that will resonate the most within an organization, if there are any sort of like business KPIs that are tied towards product usage, those are probably the first things you want to start with, because that's going to get the most attention from people, and will typically, from like the more business-minded folks, be more important to them. I don't know, Josh or Doug, if you've got like anything else you want to add to that, like, based off what I said.
I'll just double down on something that you said, which is, this isn't just about tracking numbers. It's about like analyzing them and using them to make some decision. So they're always related to some decision you're trying to make or some problem you're trying to solve. They're not the end, of themselves.
And I think to take that even one step further, at their best, user analytics and product analytics are an opportunity to learn something not about yourself, your product, your company, but to learn something about your users. What are their needs? Why are they there? Greg, I know you're an expert in jobs to be done, but it provides insights there as well, right? And ultimately discovering user or customer needs, problems they're trying to solve, is maybe one of the highest callings of product metrics, product analytics.
Yeah, I mean, I make sure I just think about, like, I'm very, very pro doing all of these things. Like, I think, like, if you're not doing this, you're flying blind as far as like what what people are using your product for, but you really need to go into it with like the proper mindset. It's not just about like, I'm going to track all the clicks and all the stuff. It's like, ultimately, like, what are you going to do with this information? Like you're going to start collecting a lot of information. You want to make sure that you're collecting the right kind of information and that you're analyzing it properly. And that all gets into the, like, what are you trying to do overarching bucket.
Cool. All right, well, Josh, how about we go circle back to you on this one? I think you made a point that kind of leads into this, which is like who would you say are like the typical users of product analytics, right? It's not just the product team, right? It's a fairly wide range. So sort of in your experience, like who else is sort of plugged into these metrics once they're there?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it depends, but ideally, understanding user behavior, tracking user metrics and product metrics becomes an organizational skill, which you can develop, right? So if it's just limited to the product team or a few folks in the product team, you're always going to be fighting an uphill battle. So the question you ask is like, who else can benefit from these insights, from these understandings? How do you turn this from it can often feel like a push relationship. Hey, I have a report. Hey, I have a chart. Look at this thing, to people asking you for some of this information. So people I've seen use product metrics, no big surprise. Customer success or customer service is often very interested in doing that so they can better train their team or better figure out what's going on when a user has a problem. Engineering is a pretty obvious one as well, right? It's an opportunity to find bugs and look for performance issues. Engineers often have back-end tooling, which they talk about, right, where they track their own application metrics. They can use front-end metrics as well to find issues or opportunities or performance challenges. Finance, right, account management and sales often use product metrics as ways to identify maybe customers who are ready for an upgrade or sometimes even a downgrade to make sure we're billing people properly. Marketing uses it to find insights about how our tool is being used, and they can bring this in and help create demand within the market as well. So the ideal is that everybody uses it, but that takes practice, right? So I think of this as being an organizational competency, which is one that you can practice and one where product often has a leadership role.
Cool. All right, shifting over to Doug, just to sort of like start easing us into the tool conversation. Do you want to kind of cover the major categories of tools and the use cases that you've sort of come across? Obviously, Greg and Josh, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. There's now dozens and dozens of tools that fit under this umbrella. I like to think of them in kind of three buckets, like in a spectrum. On one end, you have tools that are really just data focused, the kind of typical business intelligence tools like Looker or Tableau that really just help you report on the data that's in your database. And in the middle, you have like the bulk of these like typical product analytics tools like Google Analytics or Amplitude. These really let you look at, the behaviors of the whole user population on your site. How are they engaging with your site? What pages are they visiting? What buttons are they clicking on? How are they interacting with the features? And then over on the right, you have tools like Full Story that let you look at one single user session and actually play back what they did specifically on the site. And then, of course, there's tools that kind of try to fit in between some of those, like Crazy Egg has a lot of those tools, but they're kind of like a bit more basic. And tools like Hotjar kind of span the product analytics and that user experience. So you have a huge variety of them. And each has its strengths and weaknesses, and they're all, certainly have great use cases for product managers. But they can also be really powerful when you stitch them together. I want to give like a quick example. So let's say you're a freemium SaaS product, and one of the metrics that you track really closely is the number of free users that upgrade to paid. And you look at that in your Looker dashboard every day, and like a good company, it's going up and to the right real steep. And then over a couple of days, you notice it kind of starts to level off a bit, and that's unexpected, and like alarm bells start to go off, and you want to figure out what's going on here. So you might then shift to a tool like Amplitude, where you can actually look at how users are behaving on your site. And you might look at the whole flow of someone who clicks on the upgrade button and looks at a plans page and picks a plan and enters their credit card and submits. And you see typical drop-offs, at each of those points, but you notice that there's been a big change at that, final like purchase step, that a big drop-off that wasn't there before. So now you have a place to look, but you still don't know the problem. But you can go into Full Story then, and you can actually look at, you can pull user IDs out of that population that you thought was going to click and didn't. And you could actually go then to Full Story and watch some of those sessions and actually see what's wrong. Why are they not engaging? You might find that there's actually something broken on the page there that you didn't know before. So stringing these tools together, making them work together can answer important questions like that.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of double down on that, like you got to think of each of these as like a specific tool for a specific purpose. And if you want to have like a full toolbox, you need the screwdriver, the hammer, and the wrench. Like you can't just go, I'm just going to use Mixpanel and that's going to answer all my questions. I think, my career has been exclusively in B2B. There's always data points that aren't related to user events, like user triggered events, that you need to keep an eye on, like, especially when you think about like how packaging and pricing comes into play. It's like not necessarily about like things that the user are clicking on. There's combinations of things that happen behind the scenes. That's data that's available behind the scenes in some database, and you need a way to expose that. And when you layer this stuff on top, like when you start getting really into this and you kind of figure out all the golden metrics that you want to track and being able to layer them and see like where they overlap and what causes what, you really want to have all of these different types of solutions in place. It's easy ways to get going with it, but once you kind of get going with it, you see the power of like understanding things. You want to make sure you've got like more than just you're not thinking about this more than in just one way. You're kind of thinking of it holistically around all the things that I want to see are happening with my product.
So Greg and Doug, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions, but I'm curious now, since both of you have done this at a few different organizations, where do you tend to start, right? Because that's a lot of products that you mentioned, and right, it's a pretty long continuum across them. Where do you see people typically start, and what's kind of the path that they go through as they kind of build out their suite of insights?
Yeah. So, Doug, if you don't mind, I go first. So I'm in the process right now of like building a brand new product, and so this is the first time I've done that in a long time, and I'm thinking very carefully around like what I want to track and when, and it's starting with like the first thing I started was conversations with like the other execs on like what are the business KPIs for us that we want to track? Forget like how we're going to do it or what they mean. Like, what are the things that we need to measure as a business as far as people using the product? And so we kind of identified like the key product KPIs that we want to track on. And I'm like, okay, great. Some of these are user tracking events, like people doing things. Some of these are related to how we're billing people, and others are related around like ease of use and how nicely we effectively we put together the UI. And so that was enough for me to be able to go like, all right, I need, there's some custom reporting I need the engineers to develop to me, and I need that to put into a database so I can either access it over SQL or they generate something for me. I need some sort of user tracking thing. And then I need some screen recording thing. So, there's multiple options. We could talk about all that stuff, but honestly, the first thing I did was bought a license to Segment, and had the engineers start coding events. And because one of the beautiful things with like an iPaaS solution, and we can talk a little bit about this, is it doesn't matter what third-party analytics tools I'm using. And if I change my mind, I can just plug and play it as a product person and not have to worry about the engineers having to do anything else.
Yeah, I've tended to start, especially at small companies, in the middle with tools like Amplitude or Google Analytics to look at event tracking, because in the early days, me or one of the engineers is just writing SQL to the database to do reporting. We don't really need a looker at that point. And Full Story and tools like that are great to play back sessions, but you have so few customers, you just pick up the phone and you just talk to one. So it's really that middle that's kind of the first place that I usually start and kind of work as we grow.
Okay. So just sort of dipping down into some of the tool categories. I'm kind of curious, we can do the, what are you presently using comparisons? I'm kind of curious, what is the stack compare for you three right now?
Sure. I can start. So we use Segment, which I think a lot of tech companies are using these days to kind of stitch everything together. It makes it easy to capture your events in one place. We're using Amplitude to do mainly for funnel tracking, which means watching somebody's path or journey very specifically through your app or your service, or in our case, across multiple services. We can watch their kind of end-to-end path, email, marketing, app, web, across all of those. And we use that heavily. And I would say that probably 3/4 of our product user analytics get powered through that. And it's very powerful. There's no particular reason why we're using it. I think they gave us a good rate. in that. There's other great ones too. Heap is really good. Mixpanel is really good. They're all fairly comparable. And then for things that require querying the database directly, we're using Periscope, which is a SizeSense product, very similar to Looker. I'm not sure it's any better than writing queries directly in BigQuery or whatever your database is. I like writing database queries. I like writing SQL. I find it very relaxing. But mostly we're using the middle. We aren't yet actually tracking individual users. Doug and Greg, it was interesting to hear both of you talk about that. We've gotten released to pick up the phone and calling them up, even though we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of users. We have ones that are pretty eager to talk to us. But I think we're nearing the point where a lot of the organization would benefit from getting to replay specific user patterns.
Yeah, on my end, like I said before, it started with segment. So I wanted to have like a good way of centralizing all the events that the engineers are coding, so then I could funnel them into whatever product we want. We're using Amplitude as well, just because I think I've used almost every tool that exists at this point, and I find that like the most flexible of the out of the box analytics tools. It's a lot more customizable than like a Mixpanel, in my opinion. I'm using LogRocket, which I'll plug them for a local company. They're very, very similar to Full Story with they do screen recording, but they do a lot more on like the support side of the house and like the developer support side of the house. So you get a lot more like JavaScript, JSON type logs that you can pull. And in our stage, it's really important to make sure like not only is the UI working, but shit's not happening behind the scenes that we're unaware of. And then I'll kind of put it in this bucket, but it's not quite an analytics tool, and I've used them for a while, is app queues, which is more focused on user onboarding, but the user onboarding and nudges are all based off of events that you're coding in the product. So you can kind of stack them and try to change the user's behavior. So it's a little bit more the second phase of like, once you understand what your users are doing, trying to get them to change the behavior. And I kind of group that into like my stack of tools right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably going to be some good overlap here. I'll definitely +1 segment. We don't use segment at my current company, have used it in the past. Highly recommend some tool to put in the middle of all these things so that you can unplug and plug other solutions. But we use Looker as our reporting tool. Amplitude kind of serves the product analytics area. Full Story for recording and watching those sessions. Also use app queues for adoption and like tours, and then A/B Tasty for some A/B testing. I would kind of lump this loosely under this umbrella.
Great. Okay, so start with Greg, but then obviously everyone jump in. So in terms of mobile native, do you guys have a particular tool set? And again, we'll start with Greg on this one. Sometimes like a lot of the stuff we've talked about tend to be more web stack type of tools. Some of them have mobile elements to them, but when you creep into mobile native, sometimes the tool set changes a little bit. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, so it's been a while since I've had to do mobile native, and I can't remember over the last probably like 10 years. I've been mostly working on like mobilely optimized web apps rather than native mobile apps, just because it's the cost of development is so much less, and less to maintain and all that stuff. But I think it's so I can't give a good recommendation on tooling, but I think it's the same mindset. Like you want to be able to see what people are doing, what they're clicking on, is, the decisions you made to optimize the whatever core product it is to be mobile, even if the core product's mobile, like is the user experience optimized, right? So I think there are similar things that you want to track. Clicks, you want to track user behaviors, you want to make sure things have been optimized. But again, the last time I built a mobile app, it was really just kind of using the Apple and Android developer tools to track like the installs and that kind of stuff.
Right. And before the rest of you guys answer, like to the extent you're using like React Native or something like that to sort of bridge the worlds between mobile optimized web and it's actually kind of native, feel free to throw that into your answer as well.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, so we are a mobile app, primarily like, 98% of our user activity happens within our app. We're very light on web. We use that same product stack. Same technology stack. Everything is inside of Segment because we do have parallel functionality both in mobile and in web. We found it useful, and this might be a whole area we dive into, which is how do you decide what to track and how do you make decisions? For us, we decided that we would keep our events the same across all of our platforms, just because we see users occasionally moving in and out, and it's beneficial, and we're lazy. We don't want to build more charts and graphs than we have to actually be able to do. And again, I feel like you never have one of these conversations without a feeling like everybody's plugging Segment, right? Segment is really key for us here because, again, we have one path in and multiple paths out, right? We use the data, not just analytics tools, but also in marketing tools, also in customer tools. And maybe the cautionary tale was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when I was at Gas Buddy, we were making the decision, we didn't use Segment. We decided not to. We used local Localytics, pour one out for our buddies down the street. We were using Localytics, and the struggle is when, for whatever reason, a company can no longer service your needs because maybe they get acquired or something else happens like that. I don't know what my friends over at Gas Buddy ended up doing, but they would have had to re-instrument their entire technology stack, and that's a lot of work to go do. In a prior job, we ran out of the free tier at Heap and we weren't willing to pay 20 grand. So we just turned it off and flipped a switch and started running all of our analytics inside of BigQuery. It was really, really painful, but it was possible, right? Painful is better than impossible. So we use the same stack that everybody else does.
I can't help here. We don't really have a mobile app, so
Okay, good.
I'll defer.
Well, then switching over, how about A/B testing frameworks? I mean, there's again, another swath of tools out there. Is there one that's sort of risen to the top? Is there a segment of that category that you guys are hot on these days?
I think Optimizely is probably still the gold standard for A/B testing, from what I've heard and what I've tried. And I think, well, if you talk to a marketer versus a product person, you might get different answers, right? Because A/B testing, but still probably Optimizely, like A/B testing landing pages and the website and that kind of stuff is slightly different than, I've honestly, from the product A/B testing, I just use feature flagging, right? So I will kind of, if we're developing something that's very disruptive or very experimental, I'll just kind of feature flag it and then segment out based off of cohorts or user behaviors, who we want to expose to it on when, you architect the experiment based off of what you're trying to learn on it. But if it's something is I tend to find that a lot easier is just build the feature flags in and do it that way rather than screwing around with the third-party tool for products. Websites are a whole different thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say we're using A/B Tasty right now because most of our needs are kind of more marketing related. That's kind of a simpler tool. Definitely agree. Optimizely is the standard, super powerful, really flexible, great analytics built in. Though pretty much at every company, I will agree with Greg. We've kind of been forced to build a bit of our own A/B testing into the platform too, because all these tools can't really do everything. There's always something weird you're trying to do. So every place I've been, we always also then have to build something else of our own. But
yeah, or you got to work around the tech architecture or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But these tools are great, especially for simple front end stuff. To not have to have an engineer change text on a button or a paragraph or move an image, really gives you a lot of control over those things. So let the engineers focus on the meatier stuff.
I've always wanted to try Optimizely. Whenever you get a bunch of folks together, what's the gold standard here? They always say Optimizely. We've never really done it just because, we've always had enough corner cases that feature flagging was the right tool for us. Google Firebase, if you're building a mobile app, has a really nice experiments feature, which puts a little bit of automation and control around feature flagging. And sometimes the engineers even let the product and design team go in there and play and throw a couple of switches as well. So we feel like we're doing stuff. And it's been pretty effective for us so far.
Great. Okay. So shifting cadence a little bit, how about we talk about common pitfalls? So there's sort of we have the where do you start question. And I think, at least in my experience, I've never come in and gotten to pick the stack from the ground up. So Greg, I'm very envious of you, but usually you're coming in, you're inheriting some stuff, you're sort of making changes. So what are your sort of been your experiences around, pitfalls, either your own doing or those before you, and sort of like what you've learned from those and how you sort of managed through those?
Yeah, there's a lot. So I think, well, like, like if you talk about like coming in, I've come into situations where companies have been trying to track things and they're tracking the wrong things. And as much as you don't want to track everything, tracking more is better than tracking less, because if you want to learn something about your users and you haven't created the event or the system to track it, you're shit out of luck and you got to start from scratch, right? So like I've come into situations where the way that the product analytics have been architected don't match up with the business KPIs. And so if they've got business KPIs that are based off of product adoption, but you don't have the product analytics tools and events firing to directly correspond to that, you're just writing a ton of SQL, right? Like at the end of the day, like that's the only thing you could try to do to try to make up for that. So that's a big one. I think the other thing, I mean, again, I guess that just comes down to like the biggest thing I've seen is just people not associating the analytics with trying to drive business insights. You just start tracking stuff to track stuff, or you don't track it at all. That's the other thing, is like you just release this thing and then you talk to two customers, they say they love it. And you're like, yeah, we succeeded, right? Like, so that's the other thing, is like, you gotta use this as like your, I will find that like, when you talk to most customers, they are way nicer to you on like the phone. Mm-hmm. Then they like, so this gets into user research and lots of other categories. Like when you talk to people, you're like, hey, is this idea good? Or, whatever variants of framework you're using. Most people will just be like, yeah, I'll totally use that product. And you can go away feeling good about yourself. And the product analytics are really like that fact checker behind the scenes that like, did they actually do the things that they said they would? So if you don't put in the effort to do that, to put in like, and it has to be like, especially with like new features or new products, like you got to get that stuff in before you launch. So you got to see like from the day it was launched to however long you want to keep an eye on this, are people's actions backing up the words that they gave you? So I think either not tracking or tracking the wrong stuff would be the two biggest pitfalls I've seen.
Josh and Greg?
I can't disagree with anything that Greg said. I was going to give some like clever answer, like naming things, because eventually with any product of any particular size, right, you're going to go through multiple generations of people being, thoughtful, but contradictory with their naming conventions. And then it just becomes like received wisdom inside the organization that like, sign up is the same as user create, but, log out means something completely different. I don't know. There's always something weird sitting inside of there. And tribal knowledge is part of our job. So Greg, I don't know if that's exciting or intimidating to have to be the first one to go create and name all of your events. But I think the place where I've certainly personally messed up the most and gotten the most trouble is not bringing engineering on board, right? Like when I've done a really bad job of this, I've written lots of requirements around tracking, and I've pushed those requirements to engineering, who have gone and as carefully as possible and as conscientiously as possible implemented exactly what I asked for, which is no guarantee that what you're getting at the end of the day is going to be at all useful. Or is even correct, because we all make mistakes. I certainly make a lot of mistakes. So I think when this has worked out really well, it's when I say this all the time, and I feel like a broken record, like when you acculturate this idea of tracking users and tracking user behavior into the organization, certainly into the engineering group. So they understand not just what we're trying to track, but why. Like, how do these metrics tie into our business, right? Why are these things important? Why are we tracking these things? Why is it critical? And like, they're at least as smart as we are. So it doesn't take a whole lot before they get there. And then pretty soon, like inserting the appropriately named events so that you can ask and answer the questions you want becomes a reflexive activity by your engineering team. And then it just becomes magic. So my mistake has been not doing that thing. And it's always a struggle if you don't.
I think I've got 3 different ones.
Nice.
Maybe they're related. So one is certainly the like, you have the tool, you made some pretty pictures, and that's where you stop. And this is where I tend to get stuck sometimes, is I can look at these really colorful, graphs that change every day. And I think that's the end. And it's not, you've got to use that data for some purpose. It has to influence your decision-making and your planning. And that's why you have the tool. It's not just for the pictures. Number two, I see is, companies spend a ton of money on the product, but then the people don't invest the time at getting really good at it. You should have someone at your company that's an expert at every one of these tools, and everyone else should be, at least really good if you're going to get the value out of the tool. And then the last thing, I relate this to, like, when you're doing qualitative analysis, you're taught to ask open-ended questions to kind of learn what you don't know. And you can do the same with these tools. It's useful to just explore, to just slice and dice data in different ways and kind of poke around, and you might stumble upon something that you really weren't expecting. So while it's super important to make sure that you're using the tools to answer specific questions, you can kind of also just browse around and end up discovering things that you never would have expected that can be enlightening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, something that, like, to Josh's point earlier about, like, bringing the engineers on board. I think that if you make the investment in some sort of, like, screen recording tool, whether it's Full Story, Hotjar to extent, LogRocket, like, there's tons of them now. One of the most powerful things I've been able to do over the years with those tools is, like, right after you launch something, you set aside, like, I'll monitor things, or my team will monitor things, and you set aside the interesting ones. Like, if it's a new feature or a new product, it's like people who used it exactly who we thought it would, make people feel good, and the people who went really sideways. And I book these sessions, and we would have them, like, regularly, and kind of sit there with the engineers and just be like, let's just watch people use the product. And that really, like, hones in. I mean, like, all good engineers are building things because they want people to use them. Right? Like, I think, like, all of the really talented engineers are very obsessed with the fact that someone's using the stuff I just wrote. And so being able to kind of, like, sit down with them and do that is, like, really powerful. The other thing that I've started doing over the last couple of years is training my PMs to, like, we're requiring them to, like, you got to define success metrics as part of the project. So part of, like, why are we doing this? And this is a whole other thing outside of analytics, but the analytics tied very tightly into this, where if you're tackling this new, it could be a new feature, it could be a major improvement, it could be a new product. It's like, how are we going to know if this worked for us? And part of those success metrics always end up being kind of adoption based, right? So, like, we're going to know this was a success if X people did this kind of behavior in Y time frame. And then as you're building the thing, you kind of build in, when they build in the events to or whatever tracking mechanisms you need to make sure that you can measure this stuff. It's also in the back of their mind, they're going to want to pay attention to this. Like, they know that, the success of this feature or this product is going to be measured with these variables. And so they'll ask you for these kind of things. It's a really good way to, like, build attention and, like, get people to care about doing stuff. It's not just writing a bunch of code. It's like, how are we going to know that my time was worth it? And that's where these analytic tools, like, a little bit more of a micro level, can come into play.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're going to pause there for a minute and head on over to small groups. So we're going to pop people out to breakout rooms here in a minute. The speakers will be out floating around in the groups too. We'll see where they appear when we hit the randomize button. Just a couple of questions to think about while you're in the groups. Did you find things particularly surprising tonight, trying to engage the speakers and your colleagues on those topics? It's always fun to do the how mature is your organization and sort of where are you on the spectrum of, like, cultivating the sort of analytics mindset we talked about versus not. And then just some, like, what are the struggles that you guys have had as you've tried to implement new tools and try to really get the value out of them. So with that, we're going to pop out for about 10 minutes, then we're going to come back and we'll do Q&A with the larger group. It looks like everybody's back. Thank you, guys. Hope you guys had a good small group chat, and we are back for group Q&A with the panelists. So just to kind of keep things in some semblance of order, if you want to ask a question, just type me in the chat and I'll sort of take them in the order they come in. You can just go ahead and ask your question live to the people that you want to. So go ahead and put your hand up in the chat line. Everyone got all their questions out during small group. We're getting overwhelmed.
I do have a quick question. So Greg, So you mentioned one of the areas, where users went completely left. So for example, they did completely not what you thought they would. They didn't progress through this particular workflow. Were you able to figure out, and then from your analysis, were you able to figure out why and maybe provide an example of what they did?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways that I've run into that problem. I'll think of some of it might, to be honest, like I've not run into the scenario that you usually read about where it's like the UX was so confusing they didn't know what to do. That I've never had that problem, and I know people who have, but like nowadays, like there's standards and people build things the same way, right? Most of it comes into the problem you thought you were solving wasn't that painful, right? So you might have had this idea to go expand your product to do something else because you as a business want to generate more revenue out of your customers, but the customers were perfectly happy with the amount of revenue they're giving you and the amount of stuff that they were doing. And what you built was not that enticing. So they were willing to try it out, but they weren't willing to actually stick with it. That would be one. And then kind of related to that, which I've run into multiple times, is user behavior will sometimes be dictated based off of how your pricing works. So if you have a like interaction or volume type pricing model where you're charging per unit, right? So if you are, like a content creation tool and you're generating, like the contract that the customer signed is based off of the volume of content they're creating, that can create real adverse effects with how your users use the product, where they're scared to burn all their credits with you before their contract is up. And that'll make them like go 90% of the way and then be like, all right, well, I'm not sure about this. I've run into that a lot where like the customers buy these like bucket of usage credits and they protect them. Even if they have like 5,000 of them, they're scared of burning them. And you introduce this new thing that they can build, and they're not confident the new thing is going to generate the same kind of results as the old thing was. So they'll do everything up until the final step, and then they'll go away. So like that's most of what I've run into, is either like the pricing model has gotten in the way of the users really adopting something, or you made the wrong call on building something that wasn't that valuable.
Thank you. So it seems that people are exiting right as soon as the workflow is about to end, or at the kind of the commitment area.
Yeah.
Is there any way? What have you? What kind of functionality have you thought about or implemented to help users make that final call?
In those scenarios I talked about, some of it is just removing the financial concerns. Like, you can do this for free for whatever period of time. That typically unblocks most people. Functionality wise, maybe putting in some nudges somehow to kind of reinforce that what they're doing is going to meet the need that they wanted to. Yeah, I don't know. Like there are certain things that, like, as far as like user behaviors, always don't go the way I thought they would. Any kind of in-app analytics never gets adopted the way that I thought it was, because I think most people are lazy or too busy. And I've never gotten, I was talking to some of my team about this earlier today, like I've never gotten the ROI out of an analytics within my product that you thought you would. It's table stakes for just about everything, but no one really uses them the way that you thought they would. And sometimes it's just really about like getting a better understanding of your users. Like you just thought they were going to do more than they actually did.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. All right. Anybody else have one? Yes, maybe no.
I have a question.
Go.
So we're just getting started with Segment. Any tips and tricks for somebody getting started with Segment? Like, our intent was to just kind of put in the bare bones tags in all our apps and sort of see what we got back in terms of data, and then drop something like Mixpanel or Amplitude in there and kind of experiment with it. But any better pointers than that?
I'm curious, Doug or Greg, if either one of you ever made this mistake, but since this was my big mistake first time doing it, I'm going to warn you off. Don't forget there's 2 different event calls, right? There's 2 different calls you can make. One for identity, one for event. Don't skip the identity one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Really make sure you get the identity call down. Like however you want to segment your behaviors, right? Make sure you got all that stuff in, like to Josh's point, like all of the attributes of the user or the account, and make sure they're in the identity call, or else it's just like a bunch of really interesting anonymous data.
Right. So like almost all the advice you're going to hear from us is along the lines of understand your business, understand your problems, right? What answers are you trying to come up with, right? And build your work around that. But also like read the technical documentation like pretty carefully through, and then have your engineers read the technical documentation pretty carefully through, and then I don't know, maybe have your marketing team do it as well, because there's no harm in getting more eyes on it. But like, yeah, don't be like Josh.
Yeah, Segment's got some really good documentation and like
Really good documentation.
Google Sheet templates that you can use.
Engineers love it.
Yeah.
So RTFM.
Yeah.
For the identity call, I guess I had this idea that as long as we passed a single identifying piece of information, then we could pull in the rest of the data that we want to segment off of, because we're going to dump. We also have data flowing in to segment from our app or from our backend.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess and I'll go read it. I'll go read the stuff more. But I was kind of assuming, hey, as long as we get like the unique user ID in that identity call, I can join that with the data that we already have, and then pass that all to Amplitude or Mixpanel. But it sounds like you guys are saying get a lot of that stuff into the identity call from.
Also read the documentation for Amplitude and Mixpanel, because sometimes they require unique identity calls to make sure that you're identifying the user correctly on their end.
Yep. Okay.
Like segment's great, but there's still tweaks you need to do depending on the third-party tool you're using sometimes.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Harold. Anybody else? Do people look like they have a question, but maybe not? Okay. Well, while Abhinav, you got one.
Yeah, my question is about the ML ops. Would you recommend any of the tools, third-party tools, to measure the health performance of the ML ops that you are building? Let's say the community or the clusters.
It's a good. I think they'd be fun. I don't know. Like that seems like a fun way to spend a couple of weeks or a sprint or two or something. Like I've honestly never used them. Probably like most of us here, I've kind of eyed them. Oh, that's kind of cool. I wonder what it does. I'm always a little skeptical of magic. Doesn't mean it's not, fun to, bust out the magic wand and wave it and, say some words you find in the book. I have no idea what it would do. I tell you what, if you want to give them the try, you should absolutely do it and then report back how it goes. This is another reason, though, it's so important to get your core data down correctly, right? Yeah. Because I can guarantee that any sort of, magic analytical box is going to find some really interesting relationships, right? Definitely some correlations, maybe even some causality. But if your underlying data is screwed up, you're not identifying your users, uniquely, you're not identifying users across different platforms, you're missing key activities, I can't imagine what would go wrong, but if all of us are going to have enough problems with like data that doesn't quite line up quite right, and you're look at it and you're squint and say, oh, we totally screwed this one up. Right? If you do that when you're manually doing it, I can only imagine how easy it would be to get yourself turned around with a more automated tool.
Yeah, I guess my question was like, are you asking about like using the ML focused features in certain tools, or are you talking specifically about like analytics tools for ML ops? Because like we have a heavy machine.
The second one, the later one. Yeah.
Okay, we have a heavy ML component in our product, and like we're in conversations with Fiddler right now. I haven't used them yet, so I can't vouch for their quality, but they promise to expose all kinds of interesting analytics on how your ML is performing. But it's just too early for me to actually report back on that. But I know they do a lot with Amazon, or Amazon bought them, one of the two, but like they tend to be the standard for that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
but to Josh's point, like I don't trust machine learning as far as I can throw it. Like never just use technology for the purpose of technology. Like always use something that's like actually solving a business problem.
Unless it's recreational, which is a totally fine technology for the sake of technology.
Yeah.
Weekend sequel, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so real quick, we also just dropped in the survey for tonight's event in the chat. So if you guys have a minute before you depart, please fill that out. Any other questions? Last ones? I always ask 2 or 3 times, and I get the third time someone says, "Oh wait, but me." Maybe this time for real. Okay. All right. Well, I think we're gonna end it there. Thank you guys. Thanks to Greg, Doug, and Joshua for coming tonight and giving a great amount of insight and pitfall avoidance to everyone. And thank you all for joining tonight. And I hope to see you at a future PPMA event. Thanks so much.